a stronger Mexico is great for a stronger U.S. economy. That's a big market that's really close to us. A richer, more prosperous Mexico is great to have a richer, more prosperous United States, and same with Canada.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Freight Caviar podcast. Before we begin, I wanted to give a special shout out to our sponsor, TAB LLC. They offer incredible support and opportunities for freight agents. Freight agents, wouldn't it be life-changing to have a higher commission split and a support team focused on helping you build your dream? At TAB, we pay our agents up to 80% of gross profit without compromising on technology or support. Make more money and guarantee a better experience for your customers and carriers by joining the team at TAB. It all starts with a short, enjoyable phone call with our leadership team to see the TAB difference. To learn more and schedule a quick call, go to tab-llc.com and change your future. Welcome to another Freight Caviar podcast episode. Today's guest is Rob Liss. Rob is the VP of MAKA Logistics, the largest agent of Armstrong. And today I am joined with Christian Gebbis, my co-founder at Freight Caviar and Shipper CRM. Today is April 17th. It's 11:40 a.m. We have a beautiful view of Chicago behind us. It's a really windy day today, so you might hear a little bit of the wind in the microphones. If you do, just keep in mind that is the wind. We can't control that. But Rob, we have some history together. Basically, we met first at like the Intermodal Christmas event party in 2022.
Yeah,
and that was like a year and a half ago. We met there. We ended up getting lunch at Green Street Meats. And then I ended up finding out that you're like really good friends with Reed, which was like a coincidence. And so then Reed actually had worked a little bit with you at MAKA Logistics for a little bit, which was quite interesting. But then we ended up hanging out last year in September. We went to the Chicago Blackhawks game that CPKC had rented out, the rail company. They rented out, and we went there and we hung out with them. And I know you're really bullish on rail, intermodal. So, and you also started your career at Command. So there's going to be a few topic points that we want to discuss on this podcast. Definitely just Rob's, entrance into the freight industry in 2013 when he started at Command. Command got then acquired by Ekko Global Logistics. And then in 2020, you went on to do MAKA Logistics, and you've been bullish on intermodal. It's kind of like what you like talking about, and you also have presentations at Loyola University or your alma mater. So we'll talk about that as well. But yeah, Rob, thanks for joining us. I know it was a long intro. Can you just, give an intro yourself as well?
Yeah, I think he kind of covered all of it. I don't know where I'm looking on this podcast, so
you can look here and you can look there.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
No, I think he kind of covered all of it. I'm kind of one of the rare freight brokers that I'm like generationally in it. My dad was one of the last ICC practitioners, so he got his license, and I think they dissolved that in like 3 months later when the industry was deregulated. So
what's that ICC stand for?
Interstate Commerce Commission.
Okay.
So the Staggers Act in 1980, and then the Motor Carrier Act right after that. So, deregulated. So one way or another, specifically third-party logistics. So I always put clothes on my back. So. Something I've been around all my life, and never thought I'd get into it, but here we are. So, it's been a fun ride, and it's something that I definitely enjoy, and you learn something new every day, and I appreciate that aspect of it a lot.
Yeah, for sure. So take us back now to 2012. You just graduated Loyola, just right around the corner, somewhere around here.
Yeah.
And how did you get into logistics itself? How did you start your career?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So like I mentioned, I think logistics is probably the last thing that I ever wanted to do. I went to the same high school as Reed. I found that out. It was like 4 years ahead of him, so we didn't really overlap. But so coming from Arizona, I applied to two schools, University of Arizona and Loyola Chicago. So the reason for that is Arizona at that time was just ahead of Mississippi and Alabama in terms of public education. So if you tested high on this aptitude test or whatever, which again, the bar was really low, then you could get a free in-state tuition waiver. So I had a free in-state tuition to University of Arizona, but I went to a Jesuit high school, and there's one scholarship that each Jesuit school gets to go to Loyola, and I was the only one that applied. So I got that scholarship, and so I'm like, yeah, I kind of want to go out of state. Figured out kind of the math, and my family had some money saved up for me, so like I can go to Chicago if I can graduate in 4 years, but I won't have any debt when I graduate. So I was able to do that. Went in as a English major because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And it was also helpful in that there's a core curriculum at Loyola with liberal arts, and a lot of English classes that counted as electives also could count to double count to fill those core requirements. So it was helpful in that I was able to add economics. I realized that English was pretty not super helpful in terms of entering the job market. So I double majored in English economics, and I was also able to study abroad in Spain for 6 months and graduate on time. So that was like kind of my goal. So I got out, and then I'm like, well, now what? I didn't really have a plan on what I want to do after that. I thought I wanted to go to law school, and I got some of the best advice of my life from my dad. He's like, you probably should work at a law firm first. I don't think I lasted a month in that job. I hated it. I was bad at it. It was just not for me. So left. Didn't really know what I was going to do. Still had some kind of money saved up that I was able to kind of live on for a while. Went to bartending school. There's the American Bartending Academy is downtown. It's like been around since the 70s. So I was valedictorian in my 3-week bartending class.
I've heard it's not cheap, right?
No, it's not. It wasn't like also the best return on investment. I do have, at one point I had a very elaborate tiki bar in my house, but didn't really know what I was going to do with that. And so eventually my dad's like, hey, like, you got to do something. And he offered me a job that would have paid me roughly double than the job that I took, but I had to move to Edgerton, Kansas, which is like an hour outside of Kansas City, and working at a grain terminal for export grain for Intermodal. And I was kind of like, I didn't really want to do that. I also am like, well, if I don't like logistics, I don't want to burn that bridge. And my now wife was, she did a 5-year program for get her master's in mathematics. So at Loyola, so I didn't really want to screw that up either. So instead I took a entry-level role at Command Transportation, and that kind of what started my career.
Okay. Command, that was in 2013.
Yeah.
Right? When did Command start?
I think Command started in, I want to say like 2008, somewhere around there.
Okay. Right after the calls not compete ended?
Yeah. Before my time, but
sure.
At that time when I started, they'd already grown outside of their initial building in Skokie, and they had a satellite like across the street. Because they had that building with the big billboard, the Command Hearst truckers, and they would change that every so often. I don't know.
So I think Andy brought that up yesterday when we were interviewing him.
It was genius marketing on Danny Zamos' part. So I think they went viral a few times. And
Danny Zamos, you said, was okay. Shout out Danny.
Yeah, that was his. To my knowledge, that was his idea. But I think the most successful billboard thing they had, they actually got a cease and desist letter from Justin Bieber, because Bieber had gotten some kind of like drag racing charge in like Miami, and the U.S. was playing Canada in, I don't know, the Olympics or something in hockey. And so they had "Loser Keeps Bieber" with Bieber's face on the big billboard.
Okay.
And the Bieber legal team did not like that, so they got shut down. But you can still Google it and find the actual image. But
that's funny.
It's great in the cold calls afterwards, where it's like, "Did you see our billboard?" And like, so it was. But it was a great thing. People knew the company from that, and
yeah,
it's really hard to trade on a brand name in the brokerage space. So it was nice to have that, and it was really a well-run company. I think I learned a lot from Command in terms of how it was structured. I think it was kind of like working there was kind of like working inside of a Rolex. It was like a very well orchestrated machine in terms of how all the pieces worked. Everyone kind of had a defined role, and all the incentives were very much aligned to go out and get profitable freight, really focus on, high margin business, high touch accounts. It was not a volume play. It was always a, find the right freight for the right carrier kind of company.
Yeah.
I think an example of that, and I really enjoy this during like the interview process, is like there was a very basic, like there's a phone screen, and then there was a, you walked in and they, for an interview, and they would give you a piece of paper, and it was 2-sided like test, and they give you like a calculator. So one side is like, can you figure out your commissions, and sort of like, if you want to make this much a year, how many loads would you need to book? Here's the averages. So it's sort of like you'd know what you were getting into. And the other side of the map was a map of the the continental U.S. and that's like, hey, name all the states you can. And so everyone's just like, all right, well, how do you do that? And so you sit down in this like lobby, and it's pretty small. It's maybe about the size of this area here, and that's a coffee table right there. And underneath it, this rug was actually a map of the United States, like one you'd find in like a kindergarten classroom.
Yeah.
And there's some magazines on top of the thing, and there's a camera looking at you. And the test wasn't so much for, hey, have you memorized where all the states aren't mapped? The test is, can you look down and realize that the information's right in front of you and put that together? So there's lots of little things like that were kind of throughout the company where it's sort of like, okay, I can sort of see why things are structured this way, why the incentives are aligned this way. It was a very, I think like Paul Loeb's a genius, and I wish I could say I had a great relationship with him. I think we said like 2 words to each other, but it's the dude that I had really admired from afar and like really kind of blown away where I'm like, all right, how does this work? How does this work? Why are we doing this? And I think I learned a ton just kind of being there by osmosis to figure out like, okay, why is this structured this way? Why are we doing it this way? And it was a really great experience to learn from.
Yeah.
Hey there, amazing listeners. If you're enjoying what you're hearing on our podcast, we need your support. It will only take a moment, but it would mean the world to us. Please make sure to hit the like button on this video, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to share with one of your friends that would enjoy our content. Your engagement helps us reach more people and bring more awesome episodes to you. Thanks a million, and thanks for being part of the podcast community.
That's neat. It's cool to hear that too. You were there, I think, 3 years before they got acquired by Ekko, right?
Yeah, around that time, yeah.
Okay, so you're 3 years into command. How was that whole like transition, and like what did that look like being acquired by Ekko?
Yeah, so that was it was a little there's definitely some friction on that acquisition. So there is some excitement. There's also sort of like, all right, well, might lose customers, how to go.
They're going to lose customers.
So there's overlap, right? So the for instance, like let's say Ekko works with a large grocery chain and Command works with the same large grocery chain. Who ends up with the account, right? Because both sides are incentivized by commission. For me, I think it was actually 2 years in for me. I think it was 2015. So the first Command was like you were in training, and then you either go customer carrier side, and then you basically, you're someone's assistant for a year, and then you have a year to like cover your draw on commission, sort of like a 2-year thing. So I was kind of just coming out of that. So I didn't have, a very big book. I had like one account that was, had some overlap, but it wasn't like, it was really not a big deal, but it was interesting seeing, okay, what are they going to do? How are they going to integrate us? Because I think like, I really believe that Command was like a Rolex. It was a very well-designed, piece, but it was hard to scale larger than it was because only some people can really want to buy this or it's the market fit. Whereas I would say Ekko, and not a knock on them anymore, but it was they're more of a Timex watch, more mass market for more people, trying to get more revenue, not focusing on, the profit as much as, showing growth, showing, top line revenue growth.
Yeah.
It was a different model. And that kind of created a little bit of tension where it's sort of like, why are we taking all these loads that are eating up kind of all our best trucks when we have these other loads that are there? So there was some, definitely some culture clash, I think a little bit. I think the reputation that Command guys got from the Ekko guys is that we were very like mean and aggressive and like, I don't think that was totally undeserved. But it was something that I think overall was really good for Ekko, where it definitely had some, some tension points there, but they're definitely 2 very difficult companies to integrate. But as they came together and you can see that they're doing great, that it did work out in the long run. But there's definitely some tension kind of going through that for sure.
If you had to articulate like the biggest benefit of that acquisition.
So I think Ekko was the purchaser, right? It was a strategic
for Ekko.
Yeah. So for Ekko, the biggest thing they got is they got a truckload brokerage, and they got a culture about truckload of, hey, you got to act quickly. You got to function in, minutes, not hours. Where if you're an LTL brokerage, it's sort of like, all right, I put my orders in for tomorrow, today. And then, it's not like you can't do anything if your LTL pickup misses, right? You can't like call the driver and find that there's limits to what you can really do with that. Because it's different from, selling with common carriers versus contract carriers. There's just a different structure there. And there's also a different culture that kind of develops around it. So you get this truckload culture in where it's very much like, calling the drivers, getting updates, being very aggressive on, getting the best rate from the carrier, getting the best rate from the customer. I think that's a very strong culture that comes in that drives a lot of revenue, drives a lot of value for customers, value for shareholders, and it's, you can sell into your existing customers that if someone has LTL, they probably have truckload and vice versa. So there's a lot of synergies there that I think they've been slowly been able to unlock from that.
You said that Command couldn't really scale much further from where they were at because of like that Rolex. I'm just curious. I understand like they probably could have, but like I'm wondering more like how big was Command when they got acquired by Ekko?
So the purchase price was $420 million. Of course it was. And I think that it was pretty close to what our top line revenue was. We're probably held, so I'm not sure. I'm thinking if you look at Transport Topics, I might show you what that is. If you scroll back, but there's only so many customers that have large BOP boards that you can operate at a higher margin percentage. At a certain point, if you're working with a large grocery shipper or whatever it is, like you can't operate at a double-digit margin. You're gonna get squeezed down to 8%, 7%, 6% if you're moving hundreds of loads a day for one customer. So the Command model is like, we don't want the 100 loads, we want the 20 loads that pay the best. And the Ekko model is like, no, we want the 100 loads. So it's sort of like, if you want to continue to grow revenue, then the easiest way to do that with existing customers is to go out and take more freight, operate it, more leanly, not just focusing on like the best freight for your carriers and the best freight for you to be you're really working on. So I think that was kind of I'm sure Command still had room to grow, but it was, I think, sort of how many more customers do we have that we can kind of tap into this from? And also, there was, I think it was kind of like time in terms of when they're looking to sell. Because you look at Coyote had just sold prior to that to UPS. And that's, so there's some similarities there and shared history with, the Silvers and Loeb. So I think it was kind of also time where it's sort of like, all right, we can probably get a better valuation now based on this UPS deal than if we wanted to sell a year or two from now. So if we know we want to sell at some point, why not now? And so I think that was probably the other part of it. So I don't think Command needed to sell, but I think it was definitely the right time for them to, in terms of the valuation that they got.
Okay. And I know that before Ekko acquired Command, Ekko was mostly focused on LTL, right? And then they, like you said, they bought like the truckload brokerage from Command. Was Command also doing a lot of intermodal? Because I know, like, I'm kind of curious, when did you get into intermodal? And I know you brought up Danny Zamos. Mike Zamos works at Ekko. He runs intermodal there. We hung out with him a few months ago with Reed in September. Yeah. So if you could kind of like, I don't know, tell us about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up around intermodal. So my dad worked for the Katy Railroad in Dallas in the 80s, and his like master's thesis I have in my house, but it was on the impact of the Katy Railroad with the merger of these two other railroads. And like, long story short, it wasn't good for the Katy. So you can go to Dallas now and see where that track is. It's a bike path. So didn't work out for that railroad. But rail is something that I grew up around. And so my dad was an executive at a company called Mark 7. It's been bought and sold a few times in his mode transportation. They're the largest broker for intermodal shipments. So intermodal is something I always kind of grew up around, but that was not really it wasn't a big piece of Command or Ekko compared to some of the larger peers in that network. The kind of the way that intermodal has gone is the railroads focus more on carriers. So the largest intermodal provider is J.B. Hunt. J.B. Hunt owns more equipment than all the other railroads combined. You look at Schneider, you look at Warner, they've grown a lot in their fleets. So
did J.B. Hunt, just out of curiosity, did J.B. Hunt acquire that much containers and rail estate, I guess, by doing acquisitions, or did they actually purchase all that equipment?
They purchased that here. So they were the first ones in the space. So J.B. Hunt has a very special deal with BNSF, where they get really advantaged pricing, and there's more to that. And so they really grew intermodal from kind of its to what it is now. And J.B. Hunt also kind of famously, they have special containers that only fit on special chassis. So a J.B. Hunt box can only fit on a J.B. Hunt chassis, which is really smart because they can control their equipment. Someone else can't take their chassis away. They always can manage that a little bit better. So they recently bought Walmart's fleet, and what's kind of underreported in the news is that Walmart's fleet, it's Walmart box and a regular chassis. The two are not interchangeable. So basically they have to operate the Walmart fleet separately from the J.B. Hunt fleet. But J.B. Hunt is just, very advantageous position with the BNSF, which is, one of the, I think the largest, if not one of there's only 6 railroads, but they're huge and big for all the container traffic from the West Coast. Them and the UP. So, but in general, with Michael Zamost, I think his bread and butter, and he does more than just this, but he's always had great relationships with the national carriers, with Swift, with Schneider, with Warner, and then he would have access to their rail product. So reselling that as a door-to-door service. So it's sort of like, hey, it's the same national carrier, it's going to be a lower price. And you're going to get a better rate going through them door to door because they're going to have economies of scale than if you want to do it ramp to ramp and arrange for your own dray. And also there's a lot of other operational pieces that come to it. There's some benefits. You can do some more specialized things when you're doing ramp to ramp. But from a price perspective, if you're reselling door to door, you're going to get sort of a lower price from one of the larger. If you have 1,000 boxes, you're going to get a better rate than me with 20 boxes in terms of what I can offer out, as a wholesaler.
Yeah.
But but he's a great proponent of rail. I know he's involved with the UP. I have nothing bad to say about Michael Zamost. He's a great guy and has been very helpful for me in my career. So
okay, so he was at command, right?
He was at command. So all the Zamost brothers are there.
So when Ekko acquired command, they also acquired like an intermodal kind of division.
So they rolled it in. So Ekko had actually already bought out several intermodal companies. So they bought out a company called Sharp Freight and the guy in Buffalo, his name is Mark Urban, is a great guy also. So there's 2 companies that they had already bought in and tried to roll up. So they had some direct contracts they owned from that. So they had a ramp-to-ramp offering, and then they had the relationships that kind of came over from the national carriers. So Command was much more strategic in terms of how they manage their relationships with the national carriers than most companies. I think that was a big advantage for them. But with Ekko, they had those kind of direct contracts, the more traditional ramp-to-ramp, IMC, Intermodal Marketing Company relationships. And so it was something where they could, easier for them to drop boxes, easier for them to, know the actual rail schedules, plan around when the trains are actually running. You can operate at a higher service level when you're ramp-to-ramp because you can be like, all right, what's the train schedule? What's the cutoff? All the pieces that you need to kind of execute on that. Whereas you're door-to-door, you're kind of beholden to someone else's operation group on a national carrier. So it's the same train schedule, but it's really harder to align because you've got several layers between you and the railroad, which you don't have if you have those ramp-to-ramp relationships.
Sure.
I know I'm throwing some jargon out, so, hit me with whatever.
Were you doing intermodal at command?
Yeah, so we moved intermodal. We did some repos on like 20s and 40s. That was a sweet spot for us.
Wait, you did some repos on?
Yeah, 20 and 40-foot containers. So the
repossessions?
Yeah, so if you look at the steamship lines, in intermodal, it's kind of like a little bit of a misnomer, but you have international move and domestic moves. And domestic moves includes anything on a 53-footer. So like in the intermodal world, Mexico, it's a U.S. shipment, or Canada, a U.S. shipment is domestic if it moves on a 53-foot container. The internationals are the steamship lines. So that 40-foot box, if it's coming in from China, there's a trade imbalance. So that box has got to get back to the West Coast, whether it's empty or full. So if you can find the right freight to kind of reposition that empty box, it's a really advantageous price.
Otherwise, majority of the boxes are going on back empty.
Right, exactly. So
what's the percentage of boxes going back empty? Like this, like more than 60%, right?
Yeah, it goes up and down in waves. Where that repo business, like during COVID, like was very different than it is like prior to then. Also with like kind of the trade restrictions and whatever on China, it's a differing market. But it is something where as a broker, it's sort of like, all right, as long as you know where something is and how to buy it and how it functions, you can resell it. So
is there any path that like the container, for example, comes from China to the U.S. and then to optimize I think the word you use is repo.
Yeah.
The reutilization backwards is like, instead of sending it back to China, which there's not that many goods going to China, do they send it maybe to Europe where there could be products going that way, and then through Europe put it on a rail all the way back to China?
Yeah, they can do it in a number of ways. It's more of a steamship line question in terms of how they want to route it around. One thing that happened during COVID is the West Coast ports got so backed up that they would start hitting the East Coast ports. And then also as you move out of China, if you're shipping out of India or Vietnam, it's pretty much equidistant if you can go through the Red Sea to go to the East Coast ports versus the West Coast ports. So, if it's cheaper to go to the West Coast and you can rail that box to, New York or New Jersey, well, suddenly if that boat's already there, then your whole repo model changes.
Yeah, that's my inexperience talking of you don't ship from China to the East Coast, you ship from
to
the West.
Yeah, but you can though. Like there's like over COVID, like, before the Russia-Ukraine situation, like there was like people were using the Trans-Siberian Railroad and like routing around through there because of all the congestion on the West Coast ports.
Okay.
So my experience is mostly on domestic. I just know about international to get myself in trouble, but it is really interesting. And a lot of it is, so much of this job is just keeping your eyes open, your ears to the ground and learning. And the more that you learn, the more that you can resell, the more valuable you are to customers. I think that really, there's an educational component that's really taken for granted by most people that are freight brokers, where it's sort of, you take that extra step and like go out and learn, you're so much valuable and your career has so much more legs to it. If you go out and learn about these different things and say, hey, how are you doing this? Can we do it differently? What's the price difference? If it's moving at 53, if we did it in 340s, how does that break out? So it just depends on what you're trying to do.
Any just unobvious trends that you picked up on in terms of either international container shipping, domestic later?
Yeah, I mean,
the last couple of years, maybe since COVID.
Yeah, I mean, anything that's, I think, is like, super, and the most obvious one for us is, our asset authority. So we're primarily a broker. We're the largest agent broker in Armstrong's network, but we also have the asset authority with MAKA. We've got MAKA branded boxes. So we've got 20 reefer boxes that we send into Mexico. So there's only two carriers that I know of that are offering reefer service out of Mexico right now, and it's us and CR England. So again, like England's much larger than us, and they're a great company. But it's something where if I'm competing against one person, I like my chances a lot more than competing against 30 people.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is just trying to figure out games that you can play or games that you have a better chance of winning. So for us, I think Mexico is going to be a continued growth point. Unlike China, there's issues with the currency where the Chinese currency really should have risen given the imports. You already see that happening in Mexico, where the peso is getting much stronger against the dollar.
What do you think actually happens when the peso starts to get stronger? Like it becomes maybe not as cheap to produce things in Mexico.
Well, they start buying from the U.S. So as long as the peso gets stronger and they use that money to buy U.S. goods or Canadian goods, then you have more balanced trade. And so it's sort of like the right now it's the trade imbalance with China is it's historically untenable, right? So Janet Yellen came out and basically said that, a week or two ago, and it's pretty obvious to anyone that's in a union or lost their job to cheap Chinese labor that, this thing was not going to work out for the last 20, 30 years, however long it was. But I think that with Mexico, I think that growth along the North America, along the USMCA agreement, a stronger Mexico is great for a stronger U.S. economy. That's a big market that's really close to us. A richer, more prosperous Mexico is great to have a richer, more prosperous United States, and same with Canada. So we've got all our resources that we really need to North America right here. We have huge markets, but it's more of, if everybody, it's not a zero-sum game in terms of where the money flows. The more productivity and growth that you have in North America, and the more that those benefits are going to be shared across. So I think that's sort of it's something to be a rough transition, and from where it goes, we're getting these huge Chinese subsidies forever, but it's going to come back in that, the Mexican market can buy U.S. goods, can buy U.S. things. And that's, I think, important for overall growth.
Yeah, I didn't think about it the other way around. Actually, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So
that's what I hope anyway.
Rob, MAKA Logistics owns 20 reefer boxes they send out of Mexico, and that's with the CPKC, right?
Yeah, on the CPKC line.
Okay. Just curious, real quick. You just mentioned the trade imbalance too. So, does that mean that you're mostly there's times where you send an empty container to Mexico just to pick up a load?
Right. Yeah. So you want to kind of keep your miles limited in that. So the longer your miles that you go, the more advantageous intermodal is to truck, like in general. But, but also if you have to repo that box empty, you want to limit the number of miles because it's also still more expensive if there's not a reload in, Toronto or Calgary or whatever. You're better off kind of keeping it sort of local. So it's finding that sweet spot where the repo cost is manageable with your outbound cost, and also balancing that equipment. So if you're able to use your equipment and also railroad equipment, you're not responsible for repositioning railroad boxes. So it's sort of like, all right, can I balance that out? How does that look? But you don't want to be so dependent. If you don't own the box, you don't control it. So it's trying to find that balance on where it goes. So the initial line that we're running at volume is going to be from Guadalajara into Dallas, which is, it's more competitive because it's easier for a truck to compete with that amount of miles, but it's manageable in terms of repositioning that box, and that's a lower cost where it can kind of balance out. The advantage for rail, the big advantage specific to the CPKC, is that they own their own rail bridge in Laredo. So they're expanding that, and that will. I was down in there in January. They gave us an amazing tour. We got to walk the bridge. We got to be on a train, very much like freight nerd to me. I was like, this is amazing. It went with the contractor that's building the second bridge. I think the guy is going to be bald by December, but that bridge is going to be built. I mean,
really?
Yeah, they're going to complete that for sure.
By September, you're saying?
Or by December.
December.
So by the end of the year.
That would be incredible.
It's amazing. So right now they're limited by law. It's like 3 kilometers is how long the trains can be going into Mexico, and so they cross. I think an average of like 26 a day. So, but it doesn't stop. So one train goes northbound, and then another train comes southbound, and they just go back and forth all day long. So when they build that second bridge, they can have one going north and south at the same time. There's these giant X-ray machines that are on the U.S. side, that as it crosses, it can goes through and looks at each box like a giant TSA scanner.
Yeah.
I asked the Border Patrol agents that were the ones that actually let us on the train and go through the whole thing. And they're like, hey, how many people have you had go through here? And they said all of last year, 6. And there are people that were inside of completed automobiles that tried to sneak in that way.
Wow.
But it's very secure. They having that rail bridge and having that through crossing. The other Mexican railroad is the Ferromex. They don't have that through connection. So in the U.S., there's 6 Class 1 railroads. So that's the highest railroads by revenue. If you included all North America, there's 7, Ferromex being the 7th. But Ferromex doesn't have any trackage rights in the U.S. So that train has to stop at the border, and then it's interchanged, then go. And that stopping creates, when you see you saw the pictures a few months ago of migrants kind of hopping on trains, that's kind of the instance where they're able to do it. The train doesn't stop. There's a lot of things that I'll do that are risky. Well, not that many, but the jumping out of trains is definitely not one of them. Especially one that's moving. So it's a very secure form of transit. They have armed guards they can put on the train if it's in a high risk area. They follow the train with drones. As soon as your box is on the train, it's either surrounded by 3 feet of steel in the well car, or it's suspended 15 feet in the air on top of one of those boxes.
So are the railroads classified in the terms of the classes, class 1, class 2, and so forth, by strictly by revenue?
Strictly by revenue. So
nothing like class weight or how much volume they do, but just by how much.
Yeah, how much revenue there is, and it also ties into the number of shipments, transactions, and things like that. So there's been a huge, since deregulation in the railroads, and which predates the deregulation in trucking by about a year. There was it's 136 or 156 railroads in 1980, and now there's 6. So a huge amount of consolidation. Redundant tracks were closed, so like turning into bike trails, and this is like the Katy Railroad that's talking about in Dallas, where it's like their main source of revenue was like handling interchanges between 2 larger railroads. We were able to close that gap, and then suddenly it's not viable. The history of railroads is very interesting and for me, but it'd be pretty boring to go into deep.
I'm curious, like, for example, even just to understand class 1 railroads, are they at capacity for the most, can they take any more revenue than they are doing right now? Putting inflation aside, right? Like if you just put that aside, are we capped out at the biggest railroads across America right now?
The short answer is no. There's with an efficient rail schedule, the train's running faster, more often, on time. There's always ways to make trains run more efficiently. The caveat on that is make them run more efficiently and safely. There's a lot of news on, precision scheduled railroading, PSR. People tend to blame that when there's accidents, and in some instances that's justified, in other instances it's not. The pioneer of PSR was the Canadian Pacific Railroad, the guy named Hunter Harrison. That's the main one they did the contract with. They've been the safest railroad for the last decade in terms of accidents and derailments. So it's totally possible to run your train faster than anybody else and safer than everybody else, but it really takes a top-down culture of making sure, like, accountability is every level, that we're running this train on time, fast, and safe. There's a great presentation at a food shipper at a carrier summit, and the guy came out and had a long story, but his whole point was that if safety is not your number one priority, it's not a priority. You can't go to a truck driver's funeral and be like, yeah, well, safety was our third priority. It's nowhere, right? So, and I think a lot of companies lose sight of that. So there's a John Oliver thing on railroads last year, and they had a clip they played of Hunter Harrison, who's now deceased, but him talking about having blood on his hands, from a train derailments and all of that. What they didn't say on John Oliver is that, well, after that hearing, his railroad was the safest, in the country. So there's definitely always room for improvement. The railroads own their own track. They're responsible for, maintaining it, for expanding it. So it's something.
I didn't know that, because I thought actually when a lot of these derailments were happening, I thought that was actually like maybe a lack of involvement of the government.
Yeah, I mean
because there's some like pretty bad derailments recently, like toxic tubes.
Right, and I know in Ohio, they had Norfolk Southern, they had an accident, and they had another, I think, derailment. I forget I don't even want to say it, because I don't know for sure. Not most recently, of like plastic pellets that fell off. But the railroads have a responsibility for safety. The other side of it is that they're all publicly traded companies, and so if you have pressure from Wall Street to publicly traded.
Oh, publicly traded. Sorry.
Yeah. I tend to mumble a little bit, so like
I thought you said they're shady companies.
No, not shady, just publicly traded.
Yeah, publicly traded. Yeah.
So if you have like activist investors that say, hey, we want you to run at a higher operating ratio, those pressures coming in sometimes are really negative, where people are trying to force more in because they get some direction from shareholders that maybe isn't there. I think that if you talk to anyone that works for any railroad, one thing that you'll really find is that they really love trains. I mean, it's something where they want the train to be there, they want it to be safe, they want it to run, smoothly. And there's, always a lot of pressure between, activist shareholders that want more return for their capital, and also people that are just really love the railroads and want the railroads to be running safe and efficiently and smoothly. And I think the companies that are the most successful are the ones where they let the rail people win. But in general, there's not a safer form of transit than rail. It's much safer than a truck, much safer than any other form of transit. It, like everything else, it always has room to improve. But
just out of curiosity, is that in terms of safer? Is that being measured by cargo being damaged or by people on those trains or people around them? Even?
Freight agents, wouldn't it be life-changing to have a higher commission split and a support team focused on helping you build your dream? At TAB, we pay our agents up to 80% of gross profit without compromising on technology or support. Make more money and guarantee a better experience for your customers and carriers by joining the team at TAB. It all starts with a short, enjoyable phone call with our leadership team to see the TAB difference. To learn more and schedule a quick call, go to tab-llc.com and change your future.
Yeah, so people on trains for sure. So it's sort of so let's say a train derails and everyone on board dies, which would be terrible tragedy, an accident. But we got a train crew of 3 people. Whereas like how many truck accidents happen?
Right. So that's why I was trying to get a comparison of like, total vehicle miles traveled versus total train miles traveled by pedestrians. Like I could see, the statement there being validity around like, that it's safe via train, but at the end of the day, not many people use trains.
Yeah, your risk bucket really shrinks, in terms of moving something rail, where it's sort of like there's not another car on the road. There's not another train that's going to be on the same track that could hit it. There's your risk bucket really shrinks in terms of the number of things that could go wrong on that train. And you have a lot of safety checks in place. There's a great movie, Unstoppable, directed by Tony Scott, Ridley Scott's brother. It's like Denzel and Chris Pine. It's great. It's based on a true story, but it's like fictionalized for drama. But it's like this train that like through a series of like improbable accidents, and you can watch it all happen because it actually like did where it's sort of like, oh, they did this, they did that, and that, and like because of it, like this train with nobody on it, with no brakes, is like hurtling, full of chemicals, and like they have to like chase it down in a car. But it's a great movie. It's like 90-minute thrill ride, so like highly recommend. Unstoppable.
Put it on the list.
Yeah, there's like a if you ever watched the Rewatchables podcast, there's a Quentin Tarantino was a guest on 3 episodes, and he's like, hey, this is one of the movies that he talked about where it's like underappreciated and like it's amazing. So,
Wow.
Unstoppable, great. But you just look at like all the things that had to go wrong for that train to be in that position are really big. But even then, it's sort of like the amount of time they had to correct that train from getting into a much thing. They had hours to do it because they can have signal clearance. They can like coordinate with other railroads. There's all these different things that they can do. So when you have a more controlled network, your safety area is a lot higher. In terms of cargo, one thing that most shippers don't realize moving intermodal is that the shipper is responsible for securing the freight. It's called blocking and bracing.
What is it called?
Blocking and bracing.
Blocking and bracing. Okay.
So the reason for that is, the drayman, the driver that picks up the container is going to be different from the driver that delivers it. And plus a crane is going to lift that box off of the chassis and onto the train. So if something does shift in transit, how do you establish fault? Was it the original drayman? Did it shift going onto the train? What happened with it? In the instances of you shipping like steel coils, which is a restricted commodity, if that giant steel coil shifts, that could derail a train. It's very high risk. So the shipper is responsible for securing the freight. The result of that is that if you're the shipper and you're actually responsible for securing the freight, you're way more equipped to actually secure your own cargo than a driver that's maybe never been to your facility before, didn't know they're picking up your freight until maybe 3 or 4 hours before they were there. And they're responsible for putting their load bars and straps in. Your clearance percentage goes way down if the shipper is securing it themselves. So properly blocked and braced for freight as a 0% claim rate. So if you're actually like engaged as a responsible intermodal shipper, you're not having any damage to your cargo, and your cargo is going to be moving very safely in between. Your risk and liability bucket really shrinks down.
Yeah. So I'm kind of wondering, Rob, you said for Class 1 railroads, there's 6 companies that do Class 1.
Yeah.
That's CSX, BNSF, Union Pacific, which is known as UP, North, Folk, Southern, CPKC. Who else?
Canadian National.
Canadian National. So those are the 6.
Those are the 6.
And that's because CP and KC merged like a year ago.
Right. There was 7. So April of last year. So a year ago, I think last week, they merged and went down from 7 to 6. And they were the 2 smallest railroads.
Yeah.
And after they merged, they're still the smallest railroad.
Okay.
Could we start at 7?
The 7th is the Ferromex.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to kind of run down this list a little bit in terms of like a freight broker, because I used to use a lot of CSX back in the day. CSX was kind of the go-to. Each one of them have like their own, I guess, like railroad throughout the United States. So each one has their own like benefits and strengths, right? Like if you're shipping from Chicago to Jacksonville, like CSX is the one to go to. If you're going from Dallas to Guadalajara, CPKC is the one to go to. So like I'm wondering, like, since you're so knowledgeable on this, like, can we run it down and then like from the freight broker's perspective, like which one like would make sense and which kind of scenario?
Sure, we can try it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. Before that, then I wanted to ask a question, like, why CPKC? Why are you so bullish on them?
So it's the only north-south railroad. So BNSF and the UP have the West Coast. They run east-west from Chicago. All the railroads meet in Chicago, so that's why Chicago's always a hub.
Yeah.
So BNSF and UP on the West Coast, Norfolk Southern and CSX on the East Coast, and then you have the CP and the CN running, east to west, transcontinental in Canada. Yeah. Both of them trade down a little bit. So the CN bought out the Illinois Central, I want to say in the early 90s early 90s, I want to say. So they go, I think, all the way down to like Memphis. And then the CPKC now goes all the way from, Chicago south through to Mexico, all the way down. They actually own the Panama Canal Railway that crosses. So they're all throughout. So they're transcontinental technically in 2 locations. So they span the Panama Canal and they also span across Canada. But they're the only ones that go truly north-south on one continuous line of track. So it's a big advantage in that, again, like the same thing where it's like us and competing against CR England. It's like Sterling could probably eat our lunch, but I'm competing against one other person. CP, their competition is the Ferromex, and the Ferromex has to interchange. So you're still having that slow transit at the border where that thing has to cross, and there's a customs clearance issue. Whereas with the CPKC, that box clears before it's put on the rail. It doesn't have to stop at the border. It just goes through. So in terms of being intermodal to be competitive with over-the-road trucking is, one, it has to be about 10% cheaper. Two, the transit time has to be within days, right? It has to be comparable. If it's a week or two, that 10% really doesn't mean that much. And so I think going intermodal, you're going to have less issues crossing the border with the CPKC. So that really improves that transit time. So, we'll see how it plays out, the next month or two. We have kind of data to compare against our shipper going over the road, where it's sort of like, I think intermodal is going to end up being faster, even though it's short miles going from Guadalajara to Dallas than over the road, because you don't have that truck stuck for potentially a day or two because there's a customs issue. So if you're faster and if you're cheaper, then it's really hard to compete against you. And I think I'm very bullish on Mexico. I think there's going to be a lot of growth in Mexico, a lot of factories coming there. I think there's going to be more demand from Mexico for American goods. You look at the growth for like potatoes, for instance, it's like 500% growth in Mexican demand for potatoes the last 5 years. Don't quote me on that exactly, but it is like a triple digit number in terms of growth. And so there's a lot of demand for, agricultural goods, different things that, opening up Mexico as a major market, it becomes possible when Mexico becomes richer and can buy more goods at U.S. prices. I think that's a net benefit for everybody. So I think that there's going to be a lot of growth from imports from Mexico to the U.S., but also in terms of returning those loads back, there's going to be good growth both directions.
I may not know what I'm talking about here, but in terms of people wanting to build factories in Mexico, my understanding is it's because it's cheaper labor at this point, right?
Yeah, cheaper labor, but also you're closer to the U.S. So even though it's cheaper labor, it's still not as cheap as, China or Vietnam.
In terms of the logistical cost of moving?
Yeah, so in terms of like labor costs, it's cheaper over there. But in terms of like, it's all about shrinking your risk bucket. So, all right, we can't get our material on a ship. And if we do, it takes a week or two for that thing to go. Whereas if you manufacture it in Mexico, the manufacturing takes roughly the same amount of time. But your transit is not, I'm not waiting 2 weeks for it to get on a ship and then for it to get to the port and then to get offloaded and then to get railed to me. It's sort of like I can expedite that much faster. So the goods, the factories that are in Mexico, automotive, a lot of, mechanical assembly, like Whirlpool has big factories down there. Lego has a big factory down there. So there's a lot of things that are sort of like on the more time critical components where your risk bucket shrinks, where it's not like, if you're during the start of COVID, all the gloves and everything else, the PPE that's manufactured in China, it would take so long to get over here. It's sort of like, well, if you manufactured more of that stuff in Mexico, you're shrinking down your time to market a lot. So from a geographic perspective, Mexico is going to grow. Certain goods are always going to make more sense to be produced in the lowest, labor cost countries. But in terms of just time to market, you can get your product to your customer much faster manufacturing in North America than you can overseas.
I'll got it.
This is going to be a long kind of question.
Okay.
But not even a question, there's going to be a few components to this. And like you brought this up, Rob, like that you're competing against Sierra England now, like 30 others, maybe for this rate. Like that's like basically who we're in this bucket with. I feel like doing what you do is a lot more time intensive on the front end because like you have to get a contract signed with CPKC. You need to actually like move freight on you have to buy containers and put it on there. Like when I see like containers moving on rail, you see like the big guys, you see like Amazon Prime, C.H. Robinson, J.B. Hunt, like you mentioned, the largest in the nation, STG Logistics. It's like, it's a field that, like most freight brokers don't really get into. Like, sure, like they'll buy the CSX line from Chicago to Jacksonville but it just seems like there's so much more work that goes into that. And so like, yeah, you're not competing against so many people, but it's like a lot more difficult to get into if I'm not mistaken. Cause like if it was easy, then everyone would be doing it. Right.
Right.
So like how how does like a freight broker listening to this, and maybe you don't want to disclose this because you don't want more competitors, but let's just say like you're a freight broker, like damn, like what Rob's doing is pretty sweet. Like I want to offer that to my customer. Like what's that process even like?
Yeah, I think that I think just to get a step back from the process of it, I think it's more of the rationale for it. So like in theory, like we compete against Sierra Wind. In reality, we're not competitor with Sierra Wind. They're so much bigger than us, and that's like it's not the pie is big enough that we're not going to overlap. You know, it's especially for as small as we are. I think for us and kind of the philosophy that we've taken to it, what I would suggest for other brokers for their customers is to go back to the watch analogy, is that the best customer that you have is sort of like a broken watch, and figuring out, hey, what are the pieces that are needed to get this thing clicking and turning and telling time how it should be, and can I provide those pieces to it? So having the asset authority, having the rail contracts, I can go to a customer and be like, hey, you're moving stuff from Mexico over the road, you're having XYZ issues. If you converge intermodal, you would have, these potential solutions, and there's drawbacks to either one. Here are this things that I can add to you, and because I have this asset authority, I can sell these things into you. Does it make sense for us to go out and try to buy, 2,000 boxes and compete against Sierra Wind? Probably not. But what does make sense is we can go to our customers and say, hey, what do you need? What's the solution that you need? Do you need assets? Do you need hard assets there? That's something that we can provide, but makes sense for you. So I think that's kind of the track that I would take for any brokers, is just really look at your customers. Without your customers, you know a business. Otherwise, you're playing Field of Dreams. Like it's a great movie, but if you build it, no one's necessarily going to come. So it's a lot of it is figuring out, what makes sense, what's the niche that you want to occupy, and also what are the games that you want to play. And the biggest thing is figuring out, who's on your team once you figure out the game you're going to play. Your customers have to want you to be successful. They have to want you to make money. That's key to any business relationship. If you have your customer is going to beat you up and treat you like any other vendor, then that's something that you can't really build around. You can't go out and make those investments. So it's just taking stock of your customers, what their needs are, what you can provide to them, and also what changes you may need to make to your business to do it. It took us about 2 years to get to this point where we have boxes moving. And that was, it was 2 difficult years of trying to go through and get this set up and getting the pieces in place. We're very fortunate to be able to do that. But it's something where, if someone wants to try to chase us, I mean, like, we got a 2-year head start on you, like, by all means, go ahead. But you're probably better off going to, someone that already has a large piece of boxes, seeing what their needs are, and trying to just be a broker and find a match of that equipment. Jason Hilsenbeck does a great intermodal presentation every year at a dinner that was a few weeks ago. He gave us a really glowing shout out that was very, very made me blush in the back of the room. But he walks through, hey, here's how many containers in the market, here's how many players there are, and there's a lot of containers in the market. There's a lot of excess capacity in intermodal that's idled. It's a lot cheaper to idle your box and just sit it somewhere and sit than idling a truck. But there's a lot of equipment out there that can be brought on market. So it's just figuring out, hey, can you find a shipper that has something going over the road that is moving at reasonable volume that they're opening to convert? If you can find that conversion, there's any number of companies that will help you convert that to intermodal, and working with the pieces that are already there. So I'd like to grow our fleet. I'd like to have, one point at the start of the year, we'd like to go to, from 20 boxes to 100 by the end of the year. I don't think we're quite going to get there. But it is something where it's sort of, we want to make sure that we're making decisions with our business that are aligned with our customers. Because suddenly then when we're competing to make our customers happy, making sure their needs are met, that's a much better game to be playing than like, I'm not competing against the general market, on there. So I don't know if that really answered your question. I kind of danced around it a little.
That did. I have one question. Let's just say like, hey, I have money capital. My customer wants to start shipping containers. Like, do I just call CPKC up? Like, hey, I want to place my containers on your rail. Like, is that how it like actually works?
I'm sure if you have a pot of money and you call anybody and you're like, hey, I'd like to pay you,
they'll figure it out.
The thing that you do professionally, I want to pay you to do it. I mean, it's same like for, but yeah, if you have a bunch of capital and you want to do it, then certainly I'm sure they would take your phone call.
Okay. So it does work that way. Like, you got to just reach out.
Yeah. And you also need to kind of know what you're doing, right? Because the railroads, and you look at the IMC model, and I think the railroads in general are sort of moving away from it a little bit. And the CPKC is, in some ways we compete against them, right? So like they go direct to customers, whereas like the BNSF doesn't. So BNSF doesn't work with any customers directly. they go through companies like JB Hunt, or they go through IMCs, so intermodal marketing companies, and basically they may own boxes on there, but they basically, if you're a railroad, you can kind of dictate the terms of, it's much faster payment terms. You carry they can kind of put all the liability for something going wrong onto the equipment owners. It's the railroad's rules, right? Like there's 6 of them. You got to play along with the railroad. You don't negotiate with the railroad. You agree with the railroad, and then you find ways to work with them. So in that kind of vein, like, railroads want to work people that they can work with. It's not, you kind of come in and you have a big pot of money, then you might, go to loggerheads with each other. I don't have any inside information on this, but you look at Walmart, who has a ton of money and bought a ton of boxes. They decided to get out of the container business, and have JB Hunt run those for them. And I'm sure there's a lot of benefits to that down the road for both of them. And I could speculate on what those are, but I won't. But I think it's something where, you have to be a little bit crazy to want to try to run your own fleet on the rail, because, am I really smarter than a bunch of guys at Walmart? Like, no. But I think I can manage 20 boxes. So I think I make my customer happy, and I think I can provide value to them that's unique. And that's really the focus, is focusing on your customers. That's the main thing. That's key, and I think that's really what enables us to do that. Where, in partnership with with the railroads, that are great. Everyone's kind of competing against each other, but it's all friendly in that there's also a lot of, like, mix. So, like, the boxes that we bought were used CR England containers. So, like, CR England is a vendor for us. We wouldn't have the fleet without buying their equipment. And they're a phenomenal company. So it's a, you want to, the rail is it's a less cutthroat business than, pure truckload, where it's like, I got that truck or I don't. It's very much more zero sum. Whereas the rail, it's sort of like, well, there's 300 boxes that can go on that train. Like, there's a lot more room for people to play, as long as everyone kind of knows the rules and can get along with it and kind of follow that through.
Okay. I have more questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Dive deeper into this real quick. Okay. So you have a contract to CPKC, right?
Yep.
Okay. So
CPKC and BNSF.
The advantage for you, for your customer, is that, like, you have a set price for each route, or, like, I guess, I don't know, let's just say Dallas, Guadalajara, like, how much that's going to cost you, right? Like, you're going to be paying no matter what, if I'm not mistaken, right? For a move, like, even if it's that there's nothing in that container.
Right. I'm a wholesaler, and then I can resell it. Okay.
Which is, like, you're taking that risk on, because you don't know if you're going to be able to fill all that.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. But at least you get the guarantee that you got the space.
Yeah. I own I own the box.
Yeah.
And I control my equipment.
Okay. I'm just curious, and, like, you don't have to give us, like, exact numbers, but I'm just, like, wondering, like, let's just say you're able to fill out everything for the most part. Like, what's the cost advantage that you could provide to shipper versus, let's say, going directly to CPKC, not having those?
I think the advantage for us, is that, we're easier to work with than the railroad. We kind of absorb that risk in between, whereas, like, it's the railroad's rules. And for shippers that are used to negotiating with large trucking companies, well, it's the shipper's rules, and you're playing by their rules. So there's always a little bit of conflict where the railroad is going to operate in its best interest, and you're going to make it work for the railroad, or it's just not going to work. And so we can kind of bridge that gap where maybe there's certain terms that you want to agree to. Like, let's say you want to be, net 60, and the railroad's going to be, net 7, right? So there's things that we can do to kind of make the railroad more accessible to more parties by kind of bridging that gap and bridging that risk. So that's, I think, and that's typically what the IMCs kind of do for the railroad, is that the BNSF does not want to staff a customer service team to deal with in every individual shipper that wants to ship on the rail. Yeah. They don't want to manage that process. They don't want to establish credit for all these shippers. They don't want to have to deal with, shipper X wants this and shipper Y wants this, and shipper Z says, hold that train. They don't want to deal with any of that. And so they push that through, to their IMCs, who then they manage the customers, they manage the credit, they manage all the relationships that come with that. And the railroad can focus on being on a railroad. And that's why I think BNSF is so successful, even though it's not PSR, it's sort of like the other end of the spectrum, but they're really what Rail and Company. They're really phenomenal to work with. They're a great partner. And it's something that, but they it's sort of a piece where they're sort of like, all right, we focus on the railroad, you focus on the customers, you make it work for us, we make it work for you, and that's kind of where that bridge comes in. So that's really that whole IMC industry, that with deregulation is sort of like, all right, have somebody else go out there and make the sales, manage the relationships, and let the railroads focus on being railroads. So that's really the goal of it. The CPKC, has direct customers. It's a different model in Canada, where in Canada they didn't really ever embrace the IMC model, so they would go direct. But the CP is also, historically they own ships. So like people that, immigrated to Canada from Europe, usually they would cross on the CP ship, they would ride along the CP, and they would actually buy land from the CP to settle on. So it's a whole, it's a very different historical trend from the U.S. railroads, where there's still a lot of westward expansion, but, there's the Oregon Trail, there's already people in California, the railroads are building both directions towards it. So it's a different animal in terms of the history and also the cultures, where you have these very strong cultures, at these different railroads. The kind of the joke at rail conferences is that you can tell who the Canadian companies are because they're always wearing suits. It's much more, formal. There's still a lot of formalness amongst all the railroads. But it's there's different cultures that kind of come with that, that they've inherited over generations of time. The first railroad was developed in England at the same time as the Civil War. Same time as the American Revolution. So this is a relatively new technology, but there's a lot of history that comes into it in terms of the railroad history.
My favorite part of it that I recently learned about was during the age of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, when basically the oil boom started, and how that really just started to expand all the railroads. And then on top of it, how Rockefeller basically went around the railroads with the pipelines, and it just completely tanked the railroads, and a bunch of railroads went under. And that part of the history is so fascinating to me.
It is, and it's still, you see that playing through today with the Keystone XL pipeline, where it's sort of like all that oil that's coming from Canada is coming in those giant tanker cars, and so there's a lot of that's still happening to this day. And so there's history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I mean, it rhymes quite a bit. And if you like history, if you like economic history, if you like railroad history, there's a ton of stuff by it. There's this great book by Stephen Ambrose about the history of the railroads. I think it's called Nothing Like It in the World. But there's and the railroad history is very interesting, because it's there's a lot of corruption, in terms of government contracts and grafts, eminent domain, and the plot to Blazing Saddles is the corrupt railroad coming to town and demolishing whatever it is. So
I mean, at one point there was supposedly, at least from the series that I was watching, the Rockefellers were basically so powerful to the point where they were the U.S. election kind of interfering with the U.S. elections, essentially. To my understanding, that was back in the 50s or earlier than that, 50s, maybe 30s. But they had a lot of power. I mean, they moved the entire economy, right? So
yeah, it's interesting, and there's a lot of I don't know. There's a whole Jimmy Hoffa rabbit hole you can follow down with the two union elections, and
I haven't even
into that whole other
interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's you got to wear a little bit of a tinfoil hat looking back
for sure
past on some of the stuff. It's it's interesting. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I just take it as face value, what the facts at least were, and regardless of the speculations, that's a separate thing.
Yeah,
it's fun to speculate from time to time, but it's a separate discussion. So
yeah.
Rob, real quick, you did mention that BNSF, they don't sell directly to shippers. CSX does, right? CSX, because I remember working directly at CSX, but how does that work?
Yeah, so it depends. So they were selling you directly as a broker, right?
Yes.
So that's something where you were kind of filling that gap. So the CSX, all the railroads will sell directly to shippers on their rail car service. So those giant rail cars, they don't need a middleman for that, because it's that equipment can only go on the rail. There's not an interchangeability to it. So every railroad will sell direct to somebody at some way at least through the carload business. Different railroads will, the CP will sell direct to people, the CN will sell direct to people, and most of the railroads rely on IMCs for that. And part of it's because of the billing and everything else, is they don't want to manage all of that. They'd rather have somebody that's going to agree to pay them quickly and agree to their payment terms,
sure.
and also absorbing their liability, everything else.
Yeah.
So the but yeah, if you're booking with the CSX or whichever, you're most likely booking with them as an intermediary, and then they're the wholesaler, you're the retailer, and then your customer is the consumer.
Okay, got it. And this is just like a fun fact, but like maybe you have some comments on this. Like Warren Buffett's like a huge shareholder, or Berkshire Hathaway is a huge shareholder in BNSF. Like, what's your understanding of that? Like for him, like as an investor, them just putting a lot of capital there. Like, does he just see it as kind of being like a steady stock? Well, real estate, because BNSF owns all of real estate, right? So they have like kind of like, I don't know, a moat, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, all the railroads have a moat around them, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to build a third West Coast rail that has the same scope. It's just not going to happen.
No.
So there's definitely an economic moat around them. I know in investor letters that he's had in the past, he's talked about BNSF, and it doesn't return the same, capital as other investments because it's so capital intensive. The railroads are responsible for maintaining their own track, all those different parts of it. So I own two stocks. I own the CPKC stock, and I also own some JB Hunt stock, which just took a dive last night. But my, JB Hunt and the BNSF are really intertwined, right? So nobody can beat JB Hunt's rate on the BNSF, and that goes like a way. They're the first person in the space. They got the best deal. Nobody else got that deal. So JB Hunt in that area, like the BNSF has sued JB Hunt several times to try to get out of that deal.
Really?
Yet is not. No, JB Hunt wins every time. So I think that there's those two companies I think are very intertwined. I would not be surprised if Berkshire Hathaway, especially now because like their JB Hunt just had bad earnings, if that ends up as part of a portfolio company in the future. I wouldn't be surprised by that. I have no inside information. I've got this not investing advice.
What ends up as a portfolio company?
JB Hunt. So I could see that being rolled into the same way that BNSF, because it wouldn't make. I think you should probably cut this because I don't even know if it's just stock advice.
Okay. All right. Well, this is my disclaimer. This is not investment.
Yeah. Disclaimer. Like, don't take this with a grain of salt.
Yeah. I mean, but it's something where to me, it would make a lot of sense where if like, all right, this one other company has more equipment than all the roads combined, and most of that equipment is on your railroad, maybe you want to own that company.
Sure.
As then that eliminates that, misaligned incentives where you're giving this one company a better deal with your biggest customer than anybody else.
Okay.
So if Berkshire Hathaway was allowed to own them, which maybe stopped by antitrust, then that sort of like advisor. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the next 5-10 years, Berkshire takes a substantial stake in JB Hunt. But I don't know Warren Buffett. I don't know whatever.
So Warren Buffett, if you're listening to this, consider buying JB Hunt.
Yeah, at a favorable M&A market from antitrust standpoint at the moment. Like there's basically, I mean, what deal has actually gone through recently?
Right.
For what?
For M&A, like large scale. No, just in general, large scale.
Nice Flips acquired U.S. Express.
I'm talking about like $20 billion plus deals, like those. Like Microsoft was trying to, or
what's
trying to
JB Hunt market cap right now?
Huh?
What's market cap for JB Hunt right now?
I don't know.
I actually wanted to ask you about the JB Hunt performance because I'm guessing you read into it yesterday or no?
I saw the headline. I didn't have time to kind of dive into it.
Okay.
I know that their brokerage division has been like in the red for the last several quarters, like year. They did buy BNSF Logistics, so they spun off, which is a separate company. So it's like
so there's already some bought the brokerage of BNSF,
right? Which was like unrelated companies just had the same branding.
Really?
So there
were BNSF Logistics and BNSF like Railroad had nothing to do with it.
Well, operationally, yes. So like, but they're the same. BNSF owned BNSF Logistics, but it wasn't because the same thing. Like it wasn't that they got a sweetheart. It was the same. They were a freight broker.
So Warren Buffett technically owned a freight brokerage for a while.
Technically, yeah.
JB Hunt is $17.3 billion.
Okay, so it's pretty. What about BNSF?
BNSF is
part of Berkshire Hathaway. So
but don't they have
they're wholly owned by Berkshire Hathaway.
Wholly owned. Okay, so I guess disregard that.
It says something around $200 billion. Would likely have a market capitalization as a standalone company. Would likely have a market capitalization.
So Warren Buffett owns all of BNSF,
right?
Okay, but you were saying that in the shareholder letters, he was saying something about like high costs for maintenance and utilization.
So they had to put a lot of the capital into maintaining the track.
Okay. So he kind of was like, I don't know, in that kind of sentiment was kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to keep this long term or
I'm speculating kind of out of my depth on the Wall Street guy. I'm not a Wall Street guy. not financial advice. Like, I don't know, but I own JB Hunt shares, I'm going to continue to hold them, even though I've just lost quite a bit of money on them. But I think that it would make sense. They're making smart, long-term decisions, I think, for their company. And if they're allowed to stay on their course, it's going to work out.
Sure.
And I think that if it's the right valuation and it makes the deal to Berkshire Hathaway, I think that they would buy them. So but it wouldn't make sense basically for anybody else to buy JB Hunt. But again, I'm out of my depth here. I'm not a Wall Street.
Sure.
Whatever. But in terms of other companies with moats, if you own more rail equipment than anybody else, that's a pretty hard moat to to get past.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Totally. Damn, this has been good.
This one's good.
This has been really good.
This one's good.
Rob, I want to just keep picking your brain.
We could get more to the history side of things, because I know you love that side of stuff too, but it's less like relevant in today's day. But that stuff was also super interesting too.
Hit us, Rob, with some more gold.
Yeah.
You have like gold flowing out of your mouth. Let's just keep talking.
Yeah. Now, what if you are interested in rail, so one thing that I really appreciate for MAKA to do is to support my alma mater, Loyola Chicago. So I did give a speech there, a presentation, part of their supply chain speaker series last November. So it's about the CPKC merger, but really at a high level about railroads and rail history and why there's why they're really poised to kind of grow. It's a really exciting time to be intermodal. With that merger coming in, there's a lot of shifting alliances and kind of shifting modes, and also kind of a renewed focus competing against road traffic.
Yeah.
So it's a very exciting time to be in it. So if you want, you can link to it. I got a whole hour-long presentation.
Is that on YouTube?
Pocket. It's on YouTube. You can find the link on the Loyola website. One thing that MAKA's been doing is we've been quietly sponsoring Loyola speaker series. So there's some really great talks. You also find on YouTube from last semester. We had Josh Ragland, who is he's the Chief Sustainability Officer at the Norfolk Southern. He had a really amazing talk talking about all the stuff that the Norfolk Southern's doing to impact climate change, things that they're doing in terms of like converting land they own to like sell carbon credits. It's really fascinating, and it's all the railroads are great. I know that Norfolk Southern gets a little bit of a bad rap because of that derailment in Ohio, but that shouldn't overshoot all the other things that they're doing that are positive to impact climate change. And also a lot of their sustainability efforts. Rail is way more efficient than, a steel wheel on a steel rail is way more efficient than rubber on asphalt, no matter what. There's hydrogen trains that are in development right now, are actually running traffic at the CPKC and at the CSX.
That I could probably see more than I would see truck adoption, because you have set endpoints that you could integrate more easily with, as opposed to for trucks, like deploying hydrogen stations, like, truck stops. I guess you could do it at truck stops too, but like it's just much more infrastructure investment.
Right. It's one giant hydrogen engine as opposed to like thousands, distributed across the network. Yeah. So it's way more efficient.
When do you think they're going to come?
They're already on the road. So the projection. When that's hard to say. I mean, diesel is still way more fuel efficient. The crazy. Well, here's the nugget of gold. I mean, people like hate on diesel. It's like, oh, it's bad for the environment, whatever. It's actually it's not. The low sulfur diesel is same emissions as gasoline, but it's way more efficient. A diesel engine is way more efficient than a gasoline engine. So, do you know why diesel is called diesel fuel?
All right, no.
Rudolph Diesel is the guy that invented it, and he just died in mysterious circumstances. Like apparently he was going to sell his secrets to the British, and they think that he was murdered by the Germans on a boat. It's a whole very shitty thing. But before diesel fuel was invented, it was just sludge. It was byproduct from making gasoline and heating oil, and they had stockpiles of years and years and years of this sludge they had no other use for. And so he made this engine that could run this runoff, this byproduct. So it still really gets me that diesel costs more than gasoline at the pump. It's totally it's a manufactured demand problem, because diesel is the byproduct of gasoline. So, but because so many trucks run on diesel, there's more demand for it. It's this really weird market imbalance. So there's some weird things there, but especially as diesel price continues to rise, which it will over time, hydrogen's gonna be more more advantageous as companies try to look to ways to hit their climate goals. They're going to be converting more of their freight to rail.
Ultimately, it's not. I mean, unless they're actually running on hydrogen, which I don't think is the case. I believe it's converting hydrogen to electricity at the end of the day, and then being an electric, vehicle. But that's how I might be totally wrong on that, but that's how my understanding of it is.
That would make sense to me. I'm not a stock guy, I'm not an engineer, but
Sure.
it is really exciting. So there's it's in my presentation at Loyola, but there's I think it was a UN report, and basically they projected by as soon as 2050 that emissions from rail would be zero. So it's definitely within our lifetime we'll see true like net carbon zero train transit. So that's I think a very exciting part.
Very cool.
Yeah, and again, why intermodal is still exciting right now.
Yeah, you can drop and replace the what's the first cart, the actual the locomotive. Sorry, you can just drop and replace it.
Yeah,
so it's pretty easy.
It's pretty cool.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of running on fumes here, but I guess is there, I'm happy to do a part 2 on whatever else you'd like to talk about. I don't think someone's gonna listen to me drone on for 2 hours.
No, I think they will. Maybe not right now because we have to go grab some lunch before another podcast recording. But that was amazing, Rob.
That was great.
Dude, thanks so much for coming back. We'll do a part 2 in like the summertime or the fall time.
Yeah,
maybe during JOC Inland.
Yeah, I don't know. My wife is pregnant. She's due in June, so maybe kind of. Thank you. Yeah, it could be a Ocado in the summer, but we'll see. I don't know if I can get away from it. Probably.
For sure. No worries. Well, Rob.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Let's grab some food.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for tuning in to the Daily Freight Caviar podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, or if you didn't, leave a review. Let me know what you think. I appreciate any feedback. If you'd like to have more Freight Caviar content, go to freightcaviar.com and subscribe to my email newsletter.